Okay, alright. In the middle of having a big, dumb mental breakdown thingy, right, where I'm just being like, remembering everything embarrassing that has ever happened to me because I'm an anxious idiot. Let's try and resolve that by talking to a camera about whatever's been going through my mind today, right? So, meta-narratives. YouTube meta-narratives. Not like Leotard-esque meta-narratives that are just like, grand worldviews about how society works, but more like, what Jesse and what Weeb have done in, weaving together a story on YouTube. So, the interesting thing about art is that just by nature, it inherently tends towards a conveyance of the personal. As Cynic defines it so eloquently, it's a recreation of, or not recreation, he used the word recreation in a misleading way. I'd say rearrangement of materials that exist within reality to convey values and potentially evoke emotions, right? And so, the unfortunate thing about that is that even though the more important of the 2 points of art in a lot of cases in analysis, and we're going to get to analysis in a second, is the conveyance of values, the nature of art inherently tends a lot more towards potential evocation of emotions, right? That's why so many analysis channels tends toward just like this explanation of your own personal values and all that tend to predominate so many other channels and videos in such a way that has honestly this sometimes really effective emotional catharsis to it, as in the better Digibro videos, but in worse cases ends up like Zaria's Liz and the Bluebird video, where it's just inconsequential, exaggerated rambling in the name of attempting to evoke emotions that really aren't meant to be evoked here. But that's the nature of art, right? Unfortunately, because humans are subjective creatures, and it's just by nature we tend a lot more to be emotional than we are rational. It takes conscious, concerted effort to be rational. And that's the problem with most people doing analysis, is that unless you consciously realize that and do your best to fight against that, that's what's going to come to overtake your art. And so that leads us to meta-narratives, right? Because the thing about them is that they stray away from what pure analysis is originally supposed to be. I mean, pure analysis originally supposed to be just the conveyance of values that exist in another work, entirely detaching your own emotionality from it. But with meta-narratives, you're allowed to reintroduce the self into this art form that is fundamentally based on analysis, but tends to stray away from that. And so that's particularly effective, right, for things like the Horseshoe Saga, in particular, because like you've got Jesse who like effectively just used his own experiences with what it's like to be a creator on the internet, and particularly in the Brony fandom and everything, and he used that in effect to create something that was the most effective, in-depth possible exploration of those concepts and ideas. Using the subjective element of art in order to come to objective conclusions about things that are interesting and good. That's the point of a meta-narrative, is to be able to use your own personal experiences to come to an interesting conclusion that can be objectively and interestingly examined, as opposed to just, having the self go aimlessly throughout. It's this deliberate construction of subjective experiences within an art form that is primarily characterized by analysis in an attempt to say something interesting about whatever is currently affecting you at the moment. But the thing is that all information, let's backtrack a little, because all information is inherently narrative, right? Or not all information is inherently narrative, but how we rationalize information is all inherently narrative in a sense that we take this massive, what would, without any narrativization, just be a rhizomatic, chaotic, pure holon of memes, this just a raw amalgamation of miscellaneous information about the world. And so, and we narrativize that into something that's more comprehensible and useful, stringing things together into reason. That's how I would define narrative, is something that takes things that aren't necessarily temporal or law to the subject of time and or subject to the law of time and making them understandable anyway. But anyway, art that doesn't actively go out of its way to be objective kind of misses that unless it's a meta-narrative. But anyway, the unfortunate thing is about YouTube meta-narratives then is that once you sort of run out of things to say about the nature of the medium itself, which is of course going to be the thing that's reflecting you in a YouTube meta-narrative, and a meta-narrative created about analysis, right? Then you're just going to end up retreading old ground unless you just turn it into something else entirely, where it's no longer a meta-narrative, it is just a narrative loosely based on the conceit of analysis. I love the Weeb Trash Saga, but the thing about it is that it's essentially like a more like there are parts of it that are thematically about like the coming of age of an artist, but there are also parts of it thematically about, you know, the nature of existing on YouTube and the internet and all that. That's the symbolic importance of a lot of the stuff about 4chan that shows up across creative process and End of Trash. And also, like what causes a lot of the ailments that Weeb the character suffers from across all of that, across End of Trash in particular, is this isolationist. Well, it's basically what the Lean video stands for. But anyway, and a lot of it is effectively just like rephrasing things that Jesse had already said. And in an interesting and new way, but were that cycle to be repeated, were people to continue making meta-narratives specifically about their own experiences with the nature of the internet, things inherently collapse. So you then have to kind of move on from using your own personal subjective experiences, and it just goes back to narrativization itself, and creation of information itself, where you run into the same problems as you do before, where in creating a new story, and you can no longer take your objective real-world experiences from which you can draw objective facts about how things work, and have to create your own story and your own ideas. Yeah, that's the problem with storytelling that isn't based on yourself. And that's the thing, that's the unfortunate thing about what I'm currently trying to do with all of my videos, right? Is that I'm creating characters that are essentially in no way based on myself in order to convey things very indirectly about myself, but also in part about just like more general themes that I'm not going to get into here. But that's the problem, is that I'm no longer doing a YouTube meta-narrative, I'm just doing a narrative under the guise of the expectations of YouTube. And that's where things can get interesting in terms of like what you're able to do with that, what you're able to like extract from the fact that you're just what you're able to extract from just doing what am I talking about? So like I'm able to extract from the art form of analysis itself, which is again what most people go into my videos expecting, or at least that's the hope that I draw in a new audience with these videos that are going in expecting an analysis, is that you can use that just as other interesting, unique storytelling methods, right? You've got analysis itself. Can serve the fact that it's the art form of analysis, what they're expecting, can lead to excuses for very blunt and obvious and direct characterization. So, analysis inherently kind of reveals the interests of the person who created it. Unfortunately, that's something that you can't ever really escape, even in attempting to do objective analysis. But here, I'm turning that on its head, and using what I talked about and how I talked about it as character building that then becomes the most important part. Because the linchpin isn't analysis. It hasn't ever been analysis in any of these YouTube meta-narrative things. And when you're transcending that, you're just playing off of the expectations of the art form to abuse things, which is what I get. So, anyway, I'm repeating myself. But yeah, you've got that which you can use in the name of super duper easy mode characterization. You've got the fact that you've got all these methods behind screens so nobody can ever tell what's really real or fake. in order to just falsify narratives through things like comment sections and video tags and all these other things, where you can essentially create ideas and characters who are in no way bound to again, yourself. It's just creating the illusion of yourself. That's the point of, abusing the art form, is just like creating the illusion of being subjective, like most art forms are, when in reality you're going out of your way to create new things and new characters, new ideas, new concepts, right? But yeah, so like the atemporal nature of the internet essentially allows you to go out of your way to create stories within, behind masks and alternate accounts and everything. Again, creating this illusion of reality. And all of this is going to serve a very grand, important purpose, at least in the context of my narrative. It's not grand and narrative, grand and important in the context of anybody's lives, obviously, but that's how it all comes together, right? That's how you transcend the YouTube meta-narrative and just properly use the art form for what it's meant to do. And you still run into all the same problems as you do when you're just doing regular analysis, but you've kind of horseshoe theoried your way to a superior version of that, where you're able to indirectly express your own values through things that have essentially, on paper at least, have no relation to yourself aside from the fact that you created them. This is rambling, this is stupid, this is terrible, this doesn't make any one coherent point. But I guess the core of what I'm saying here is the YouTube meta-narrative in the classical sense, the one that's specifically about your own life and your own actual real-world experiences, is to a degree limiting, despite the fact that it overcomes a lot of the problems inherent in YouTube. But like, once you evolve past it, you evolve into something potentially even greater if you're capable of actually like using the way that the art form is supposed to work. Yeah. Because there are a few key defining features of YouTube, right? Is the reality marvel in his Jesse video essentially defines the upload button as the core difference between YouTube and any other art form, or reality specifically, more importantly. But reality is not an art form, you know what I mean? But anyway. So he is because you're selecting very specific either real-world experiences or footage in the name of being able to attempt to create this sense of reality and characterization on the internet. Because that's what most of YouTube as an art form like conditions you to do, is to understand everything that you're seeing as just a different version of reality. Even the most popular YouTubers, especially the most popular YouTubers, thrive specifically off of creating an illusion of reality and what their lives are like, and glamorizing everything in the name of being good and cool and entertaining and fun. And so because of that, everything that you present on YouTube is tinged with this kind of, expectation. This is what things are going to be like. Yeah. And that's the most important thing for creating something, is just, again, abusing the nature of the art form to create something that plays off of the expectations people have set up for it, to transcend both the typical content and the meta-narrative itself. Yeah, alright, this has helped calming me down. This is probably not comprehensible. This isn't really meant to be like an explanation of ideas that's understandable, and I could probably explain this much better if I wrote it down instead of just rambling off into a camera. But I hope this was at least entertaining. If you like hearing me talk, bye. Parasocial relationships, dwa.